Empaths don't usually notice they're being manipulated, because manipulation rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with connection, with understanding, with someone making you feel needed, seen, important. And that's why so many empaths miss the signs in the beginning, because manipulators rarely arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes they arrive looking broken, lost, emotionally overwhelmed, and empaths have a habit of seeing pain before they see patterns. They see the wounded child inside people, the hidden sadness, the trauma, the loneliness. And because of that, they keep giving people the benefit of the doubt long after the warning signs appear. A lot of empaths don't realize this about themselves, but they naturally project their own heart onto other people. They assume other people think like they do, love like they do, care like they do. And because empaths are usually genuine, they struggle to imagine someone intentionally using emotional manipulation to control another person. That idea feels foreign to them because they would never do it themselves. So when someone guilt trips them, they rationalize it. When someone constantly drains them emotionally, they excuse it. When someone only calls when they need something, they explain it away. And deep down, many empaths notice the pattern earlier than they admit. That uncomfortable feeling, that emotional exhaustion, that sense that something feels one-sided. But they often silence their intuition because they want to believe the connection is real. And sometimes, the manipulator is not a stranger. Sometimes it's a parent, a sibling, a close friend, a long-term partner, someone they've loved for years. And that makes the truth even harder to accept. Because admitting someone is manipulating you, especially someone close to you, can feel like emotionally destroying your own reality. So, the empath keeps hoping, keeps understanding, keeps forgiving, keeps waiting for the other person to change. Because empaths don't just fear losing people. A lot of them fear being alone. They fear what happens if they finally stop overgiving, if they stop fixing everyone, if they stop rescuing everyone. Who stays? Who calls? Who still loves them? When they no longer provide emotional labor? That fear keeps a lot of empaths trapped in unhealthy dynamics far longer than they should stay. And manipulators sense this. Some people can immediately recognize an empath. Not because empaths are weak, but because they're emotionally open, emotionally forgiving, emotionally patient. Manipulators study reactions, they test boundaries, they look for people who tolerate behavior others would walk away from immediately. And empaths often tolerate too much, because they always try to understand the reason behind someone's behavior. They say things like, maybe they're just hurting, maybe they had a bad childhood, maybe they don't mean it, maybe if I love them enough, they'll finally heal. But healing someone and being emotionally consumed by someone are not the same thing. And this is where many empaths slowly lose themselves without realizing it. Because manipulation is rarely obvious in the beginning. Sometimes it happens slowly, quietly, little by little, one guilt trip at a time, one emotional withdrawal at a time, one broken promise at a time, until the empath wakes up one day emotionally exhausted, wondering why they feel empty around people they care about. One of the biggest reasons empaths miss manipulation is because manipulators rarely act manipulative all the time. If they did, it would be obvious. Instead, they mix emotional pain with emotional affection, moments of warmth, moments of vulnerability, moments that make the empath believe, see, this is the real them. And those moments keep the empath emotionally attached, because empaths focus heavily on potential, on who someone could become, not always who they consistently are. So even when the pattern becomes clear, they hold on to isolated moments of kindness as proof the relationship can still be saved. That's why some empaths stay emotionally attached to people who continuously hurt them, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they remember the version of the person they fell in love with. The version that seemed soft, open, real. And manipulators know this, consciously or unconsciously. They learn how to keep people emotionally invested, sometimes through guilt, sometimes through inconsistency, sometimes through emotional withdrawal, sometimes through making the empath feel responsible for their emotional stability. And empaths are especially vulnerable to this because they naturally feel responsible for other people's emotions. They don't just hear pain, they absorb it, they internalize it, they carry it. And because of that, many empaths slowly become emotional caretakers in relationships without even realizing it. They become the therapist, the emotional regulator, the fixer, the stabilizer, while the other person slowly becomes emotionally dependent on them. But emotional dependence is not love. A person constantly needing you is not proof they value you. Sometimes it's proof they've learned you'll continue giving no matter how little they give back. And this becomes dangerous for empaths because they often confuse being needed with being loved. They think, if this person depends on me so much, I must matter deeply to them. But sometimes manipulators don't love the empath. They love the access, the validation, the emotional support, the forgiveness, the patience, the endless second chances. And empaths often don't realize how one-sided the relationship became until they finally stop giving. Because the moment an empath creates boundaries, the relationship suddenly changes. The manipulator becomes cold, distant, defensive, sometimes angry. Because boundaries expose unhealthy dynamics. And many empaths are shocked when someone they sacrifice so much for responds negatively the moment they prioritize themselves. That moment changes everything, because suddenly the empath begins seeing the relationship clearly for the first time. Not through hope, not through potential, not through emotional fantasy, but through behavior, consistent behavior. And behavior always tells the truth eventually. This is also why manipulators often target empaths intentionally, because empaths are patient. They listen deeply. They tolerate emotional complexity. They give people more chances than most people would. And manipulators recognize that quickly. They test small boundaries first, small disrespect, small lies, small guilt trips. And if the empath keeps tolerating it, the manipulation slowly escalates, not overnight, but gradually. That's why many empaths later look back on relationships and think, how did I not see this sooner? But the truth is, they usually did see pieces of it. Their intuition noticed it early. Their body felt it early. Their exhaustion felt it early. But their heart kept overriding the warning signs. Because empaths often trust their compassion more than their instincts. And that becomes dangerous when compassion is given to people who weaponize it. A lot of empaths were conditioned from childhood to prioritize other people's emotions above their own. They learned early that love was connected to caregiving, to understanding, to emotional sacrifice. So they became hyper-aware of other people's moods, other people's needs, other people's pain, and many of them carried that pattern into adulthood without realizing it. That's why some empaths feel guilty setting boundaries, guilty saying no, guilty walking away, even when the relationship is clearly draining them emotionally. Because deep down, part of them still believes love means enduring pain. That love means staying, fixing, saving, absorbing. But healthy love does not require emotional self-destruction, and manipulators instinctively move toward people who struggle with boundaries, because boundaries are what stop manipulation from growing. Without boundaries, an empath slowly becomes emotionally available to everyone and emotionally consumed by everyone. That's why many empaths constantly feel exhausted around certain people. Not physically, emotionally. Because manipulation drains energy in subtle ways. Through guilt, through emotional pressure, through unpredictability, through making the empath feel constantly responsible for keeping the relationship emotionally stable. And over time, the empath slowly loses connection with themselves. Their own needs become secondary. Their own emotions become suppressed. Their own exhaustion becomes normalized until burnout becomes their emotional baseline. And the saddest part is many empaths think this exhaustion means they're loving correctly. They think sacrificing themselves proves how deeply they care. But love should not constantly feel like emotional survival. Real love should not leave you emotionally empty all the time. And eventually, something begins shifting inside the empath, usually quietly, usually after years of patterns repeating. They start noticing how certain people only reach out when they need something, how conversations always revolve around the other person, how their kindness is expected but rarely reciprocated, how they're always emotionally available for everyone else, while nobody seems emotionally available for them. And that realization hurts deeply because empaths genuinely love people. They genuinely care. So, realizing some relationships were built more on emotional access than mutual love can feel devastating, especially when the manipulator is someone close: a parent, a sibling, a best friend, a partner. Because people assume manipulation always comes from obvious villains. But sometimes manipulators are emotionally wounded people themselves, people who learned unhealthy emotional behaviors, people who unconsciously use guilt, dependency, or emotional control to keep others close. That's what makes it complicated, because empaths often see the pain behind the manipulation, and that keeps them emotionally attached longer. But understanding someone's trauma does not mean sacrificing your own mental health to carry it forever. You can understand someone and still recognize they are hurting you. You can love someone and still walk away from unhealthy behavior. And that's one of the hardest lessons many empaths ever learn. Because empaths naturally associate leaving with abandonment, with guilt, with betrayal. But protecting your peace is not betrayal. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. And boundaries are not punishment. They are self-respect. The moment an empath finally sees the full pattern, everything changes. Because suddenly, years of confusion start making sense. They realize why they always felt emotionally drained around certain people, why some relationships felt heavy instead of peaceful, why they constantly felt responsible for fixing emotions that were never theirs to carry. And for the first time, they stop romanticizing suffering. They stop calling emotional exhaustion love. They stop confusing chaos with depth. Because real love does not require you to abandon yourself. Real love does not manipulate your empathy. Real love does not punish you for having boundaries. And one of the biggest transformations an empath experiences is learning the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. Because empaths can care deeply about people, but caring deeply should not mean tolerating endless disrespect. It should not mean becoming emotionally consumed by someone else's instability. And it should not mean constantly betraying your own intuition to maintain connection. The truth is, most empaths notice more than they admit. They feel energy shifts quickly. They sense inconsistency quickly. They recognize emotional distance quickly. But many ignore those instincts because they desperately want to believe people are good. And most empaths are good. That's why they struggle to accept manipulation, because they assume honesty in others, they assume kindness in others, they assume emotional sincerity in others, but not everyone operates from empathy. Some people operate from control, from insecurity, from emotional dependency, from self-interest. And learning that truth can feel painful for an empath, because it forces them to see people more realistically instead of idealistically. But this realization is also what finally protects them. Because once an empath learns to trust their intuition, everything begins changing. They stop ignoring red flags. They stop over-explaining toxic behavior. They stop trying to save people who refuse to save themselves. And most importantly, they stop abandoning themselves to keep other people comfortable. That's when manipulators lose power over them, because manipulators rely heavily on access. Access to your guilt, access to your empathy, access to your forgiveness, access to your fear of losing people. But once an empath becomes emotionally aware, that access slowly disappears, and something incredible happens. The empath becomes peaceful, not cold, not cruel, just emotionally clear. They still care deeply, still love deeply, still understand people deeply. But now, they understand themselves too. And that changes everything. Because the healed empath no longer asks, how much can I sacrifice to keep this relationship alive? Instead, they ask, does this relationship also protect my peace? And that question alone changes the entire direction of their life. Because the empath finally realizes their kindness was never the weakness. The real weakness was believing everyone deserved unlimited access to it.